Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm about to hop on an educational Zoom call for my coaching company, Real Health and Performance. We do 2 educational Zoom calls a month. One is a Q&A with all 3 of us coaches. The other is simply educating on a certain topic. Today, I'm chatting all about whether or not you can gain muscle in a calorie deficit. This is a video I've actually been wanting to do for a while on my channel and just haven't yet. And so I figured I would just record the Zoom call on my camera, and then I'll also try to include slides that I'm using on the presentation as I post this video. So if that doesn't happen, it's because I couldn't figure out how to do it. But I hope this is helpful for all y'all. We're just gonna hop on into it. This is a hot topic I feel like I have gotten so many questions on recently. So, can you gain muscle in a calorie deficit? Just some things that I'm gonna go over. Goals within a calorie deficit. So I just kind of wanted to go through some contextual things before hopping into like answering the burning question. So goals within a calorie deficit. How long should a deficit be? How do you actually build muscle? How long should you focus on building muscle? Answering the burning question. And then are muscle mass and strength the same? So first and foremost, what is the goal within a calorie deficit? It's fat loss, mostly fat loss. Also to maintain muscle mass as much as possible. But within a calorie deficit, number one goal, fat loss. You're trying to decrease body fat percentage. For a lot of people, that just means lowering weight, losing weight. But mostly it means decreasing body fat percentage, which in turn can create a weight loss effect. It's nothing else. It's just to get to healthy body fat levels. For some people, if they're competing or something like that, it's maybe getting to a little bit less healthy body fat percentage. But most of all, it is getting to a good body fat percentage that either is a healthy amount for an individual or simply an amount that an individual feels confident in and feels good in within their own skin. How long should a deficit be? This could vary person to person, and probably with each coach, each professional, it's going to vary. My opinion, not long, as short as possible, with still eliciting a response and a goal and achieving the goal. So ultimately, ideally 6 months or less, in my opinion. 8 weeks, we hear about 8-week challenges. We hear about eight-week like mini cuts and things like that. In my opinion, I'm not a fan of them. I think that they don't create sustainability. They aren't long enough to create sustainability. You have a lot of aggressive jumps within that deficit that really just don't make the deficit truly an enjoyable process. Not that, eating less food is super enjoyable in the first place, but it just doesn't really create sustainable fat loss. 16 weeks is a great amount. I think that 4 months is an optimal amount where you have a chance to ease into it, to see some great results. But with a lot of my clients recently, at least a couple that are in a cut right now, at the end of one or just ended one, 6 months is great if there are strategic diet breaks. And I don't want to get too far into like what a deficit should be. I just want to make sure that this is like a background information. But any longer than 6 months ultimately is when we start to run the risk of muscle loss. Not significant muscle loss unless you are severely under eating. But if they're and you can see that within, people that are literally starving, people that have an eating disorder, anything like that, you can see how their body starts to really break down, and they're literally just skin and bones at that point. So it's not like if you do a cut for a year that you're going to experience a significant amount of muscle loss, but if you are literally like starving yourself, there could definitely be that factor. And like I mentioned, not significant, but if there isn't enough muscle built, it is definitely a possibility. So again, I can use competitors for this example because some of them do take longer diets due to whenever their shows may be. And again, that's a very strategic thing. It's not any of you guys because we don't coach competitors, but just talking about more of the extremes is like that is when they, have to have a substantial amount of muscle built to be able to maintain that for the stage. Moving on though, don't need to talk about a deficit too long. So how do you build muscle? Within training, muscle protein synthesis has to happen at a faster rate than muscle protein breakdown. Muscle protein synthesis is the building of muscles. I actually talked about this on a post recently about sleep and how optimal, like getting 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep is important because there's certain factors, certain hormonal changes during sleep that occur that allow for muscle protein synthesis to happen. So muscle building occurs when muscle protein synthesis, the building up of muscle, occurs faster than muscle protein breakdown, which is the process of muscle waste, muscle wasting. So essentially like breaking down muscle. And this occurs when you don't have enough protein, you aren't eating enough food, you aren't recovering enough, certain hormonal factors, if cortisol is excessively high all the time, which is why I talk about stress over and over and over again, I feel like, but stress can affect your overall results in any factor. But this also requires adequate recovery so that we limit muscle protein breakdown as much as possible. Also involved in this with training is you need to lift heavy with proper progression in order to build muscle. If you aren't resistance training, there's very slim to little chance of gaining muscle because that is how muscle is gained. Repetitive damage to the muscle, which is caused through resistance training, that is gone in and rebuilt through the protein that we consume. Also within muscle is nutrition. Eating above maintenance in a calorie surplus, even if it's a slight calorie surplus, can elicit muscle building. Energy is food, food is energy. Food is how we get our energy, not through caffeine. Caffeine can help, but food is essentially what our body uses for energy. So energy is required to train hard enough, to lift heavy enough to build muscle, and enough protein is required to go in and repair the muscle. So I know like a lot of vegans, vegetarians have trouble getting protein in because they aren't getting enough full protein sources. So that can be a challenge for sure. It's possible, but protein is important and complete protein sources are important. I have talked about in the past a lot is collagen. Collagen is not a complete protein, so it should not be used to as like a refuel after a workout. So nutrition, you must be eating above maintenance essentially to gain muscle mass. Muscle building is eating in a surplus above maintenance in conjunction with training hard and consistently through heavy strength training. And that's also with progressive strength training. So we hear all the time progressive overload. That is an important training concept that if you aren't gradually, increasing weights, increasing reps, or decreasing reps and increasing sets, somehow increasing the volume over time, it's going to be a lot harder to gain muscle because your body will adapt, your muscles will adapt. Initially, when you start training, you get those newbie gains because your body is new to it. So it's going to adapt to anything and it's going to adapt quickly. As we become more trained over time, your body adapts a little slower, but it also is continually adapting over time. And so the point being, we do need to progressively overload volume in some way, shape, or form in order to continue to gain muscle. Also, in a surplus, this is very normal. It's normal to gain fat in a calorie surplus. Your body's not just like, oh, this person's eating more food, I guess I'm just going to put it all towards muscle. In a perfect world, that would be incredible. But unfortunately, not true. In a surplus, regardless, some body fat will be gained. And that is where you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. If you gain fat in a surplus, very normal and very okay. It is important to consider though, that's why we go through phases. So in a surplus, you gain fat, but you also gain muscle. So down the line, when you do maybe decide to cut again, you can you can decrease that unnecessary fat or unwanted fat down the line. How long should you focus on building muscle? Mean Girl fans? Yes. The limit does not exist. You could build muscle, you could focus on building muscle and be in a surplus long-term if you wanted to. Now, you also have to be okay gaining body fat along the way, but ultimately, building muscle can be as long as you want to. You could stay out of a cut for the rest of your life and probably be perfectly fine. Unlike a deficit, there really isn't a dangerous amount of time to be in a surplus until you gain an unhealthy amount of body fat, obviously, or you stop strength training and then you're not actually focused on building muscle anymore and essentially you're just kind of stuck. And then all you're gaining is body fat. Then you can get to an unhealthy amount. But suppose we are strength training during this entire time. There really isn't virtually a limit to how long to be in a surplus for. You could spend as long as you want here, but minimum, I recommend staying away from a deficit, spending time at maintenance or above at least 6 months. I feel like so many people are in a rush to be at maintenance and go right back to a cut. It doesn't give your body enough time to really adapt to what's going on, to really gain enough muscle for a calorie deficit to be successful, which is why many of you on here that are my clients, we have not dieted for like a year, or almost a year. I would say 9 to 12 months is typical for how long we take a break from dieting and you just focus on getting consistent with everything. So ideally a year or more. I find people that spend a year, 2 years focused on building muscle and away from dieting are the ones who truly have the most successful cuts. Answering the burning question, Jimmy Fallon, drum roll please. I just had to add some fun into here. I feel like these things can get boring sometimes. So, no, you can't build muscle in a deficit. As mentioned, a deficit is not meant to build muscle. If you are wanting to build muscle mass and you are in a deficit, you shouldn't be. Fully being blunt there. If you want to gain muscle, you need to be eating enough in order to do so. In a deficit, your body doesn't have fuel to build. Its goal is to lose. And so if you aren't prioritizing enough food for your body to build, you can't expect to build muscle. Your body in a deficit is solely focused on burning fat, on getting rid of fat. And that should be your only goal within a deficit. Maintain muscle mass that you've built in your maintenance phase, in your surplus phase, and lose body fat. Again, you cannot build muscle, substantial muscle, in a deficit. These are a few common reasons why it is thought that you can gain muscle while in a deficit. One is you're losing body fat. So you actually see more muscle in your body, which is like the best feeling. You're like, wow, I actually have muscle beneath body fat. This is why a break in dieting is so important. So you can gain the muscle you need to then lose the body fat and be able to see it better. Competitors have off seasons. Off seasons are used to build a substantial amount of muscle so that when they go into this aggressive calorie deficit down the line, they see all the muscle they built. But for just in general population, all of us, our general population, we aren't competing, at least I don't think we are, then, the same goal comes to fruition, just not as aggressively in terms of losing body fat percentage because we're not getting down to stage lean. But the reason we take time to build muscle is so that we can lose, go down the line when we lose body fat, you can see that muscle and you can see that hard work pay off. The other, reason why people think they gain muscle in a deficit is because you can get stronger in a deficit and assume you're gaining muscle when it actually just means you have good programming. You can indeed get stronger in a deficit through consistent strength training, and I see it often, but just because you are getting stronger doesn't necessarily mean you're adding muscle mass. Just a good analogy to think about is Jenga. So you're playing Jenga, you're building up your tower. Think of that as your calorie surplus. As you add more Jenga pieces, what happens? Your Jenga tower is getting bigger, it's getting taller, it's adding more mass. There's more mass to the tower. But what happens as you start to take away too many blocks? The tower crumbles, right? And so you can kind of think of that as when you start to take away blocks, that's you chipping away at a calorie deficit. That's you losing body fat. But if you go down to too low of a caloric deficit, you can start to lose muscle mass, which is what happens when the tower crumbles. Now, are muscle mass and strength the same thing? So muscle mass is the amount of muscle you have in your body. It's essentially the weight of your muscles or the percentage of muscle that your body has total. So we hear about body fat percentage. We hear about lean mass, which is essentially your muscle mass within your body. That is muscle mass, the amount of muscle total that you have in your body. On the flip side, strength is the ability of a muscle to exert force against an external resistance. The two are not mutually exclusive. The interesting thing is muscle mass can influence strength. So you'll see people, super jacked dudes, or women, of course, at the gym lifting super heavy. Muscle mass can influence strength. So typically when you see somebody who's super jacked and has a lot of muscle mass, probably means they're pretty strong, probably. But your strength doesn't always influence muscle mass. So you can see someone who's smaller that can lift just as heavy as someone who's bigger because they just have more strength, which is why you can build strength. The two are not mutually exclusive, which is why you can get stronger in a caloric deficit, maybe thinking you're adding mass to your body, but really it's just that you're gaining strength. A few things I want to add in to just make sure you guys know, or if you don't know, I don't like to talk in totalities. Fitness and all of the science behind it is not always a one size fits all. It's not always a solid yes or no answer. So in some studies with very small sample sizes, I don't know if you guys remember back in science, but if anybody remembers what the not required, but for a quality study, at least 30 participants or 30 subjects need to be in the study. These studies that they're talking about, the Donnelly 1993 study, was taken with 14 obese women. And so that isn't technically enough to elicit an actual scientific study to be like accurate, but it did show that obese sedentary individuals eating 800 calories a day, do not recommend that. Please don't do that. Can indeed gain muscle in a caloric deficit. It was shown actually that they did. But also taking a note that these obese sedentary individuals were sedentary. And so any exercise, they probably will gain muscle mass because of, next bullet point, newbie gains. Newbie gains can occur and sometimes can also see muscle gain in a deficit because the body is new to it. So it's going to adapt quickly. Anything is better than nothing. When you start strength training, your body just adapts super fast. So keeping those things in mind. And just to bring it all home, remember that we all have muscle. Regardless if somebody works out or not, everybody has muscle. It's just a matter of how large those muscles are. So just because your muscle is showing more in a calorie deficit doesn't mean you're gaining muscle. It just means you have less body fat and more muscle can show through now. So even if somebody doesn't strength train and they are restricting their calories, they probably will look kind of muscular because any muscle they have is going to show better. So just a good way to look at it. I got a couple questions in the chat. So I've been in a deficit for about 6 months now. Now starting to reverse diet, increase my calorie intake by 200 overall, and it's helping. Is there a time frame by which I should keep gradually increasing these calories? And if so, by how much and what time? So that will vary, but ultimately I would do anywhere from 100 to 200 calories at a time. I like to stick to 100 to 150 calories, specifically for females, just because we naturally just eat a little bit less, but males, I would say 150 to 200 calories. 150 to 200 calories is about like a good amount to increase by for men. And I would say anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. It just depends on how your body responds. So listening to biofeedback, are you hungrier throughout the day? Are you experiencing low energy? Is your body, your body will tell you when it needs more food. I can use one example. I had a client who was doing Optavia. If you don't know what Optavia is, you can look it up. It's just a horrible diet. And so she was eating about 1,000 calories a day, and every week for the first 4 weeks of our coaching, we increased by 100 calories because her body was starving. And so when you underfeed like that for so long, your body will tell you that it needs more food. But in terms of just how much, if so, how much in what time frame, I would say once you notice that you're starting to over the course of 3 to 4 weeks, you're starting to progressively gain weight. It could be that you're in that slight surplus now. So once you notice that you're maintaining weight, that is when you know you're probably at maintenance, because technically in a reverse diet, as you're reversing out of that deficit, you're still in a deficit. So in reality, in a reverse diet, you should still be quote unquote losing weight. That's normal for a reverse diet because you're still in somewhat of a deficit. So hope that helps. And then, does collagen help during the day? It depends on helping with what. Collagen isn't a bad supplement. I just think that if you are going to take a supplement, it's not necessarily beneficial unless you're talking in terms of hair growth, nail growth, joint health, that kind of thing. Collagen can help with that, skin elasticity, those kinds of things. But your body naturally produces collagen. Your body also naturally produces protein. So it's like it's not bad to take collagen. I wouldn't take it after a workout, and I wouldn't take it as yes, it does help with joint health. Collagen it has been proven to help with joint health. I just take a joint supplement from Legion Athletics, and I find that helps. But yeah, collagen can help with that. There's been studies to show that it does help with joint health, but not necessarily for protein intake. In a surplus, can fat be kept at a minimum to avoid excess fat, or is it what the process is? So body fat and the macronutrient fat are not mutually exclusive. Body fat is gained through a surplus of whatever kind. You could eat only protein, and if you're eating in a surplus of chicken breast that's very lean, you could still gain weight. You could eat all carbs, and if you're eating in a surplus of carbs, you're still going to gain weight. Same thing with fat. So ultimately, you don't need to keep it in a minimum. No matter what, in a surplus, you're going to gain body fat. It's just what happens most of the time. I won't say for everyone, but most of the time you're going to gain some body fat back, and that's okay. Ultimately, I like to keep people, as long as they can tolerate it and their body responds well, I like to keep carbs and protein higher, because that is conducive to training. Your body doesn't necessarily need dietary fats to refuel from workouts. All right, guys, I hope that was helpful. Feel free to comment your thoughts below. Give this video a thumbs up if it was helpful. Feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.